the Day of Ethics today. My name is Kim Komenich. I'm the photojournalism professor here at San Francisco State. I was talking to Ken Komenich about this presentation today, and Ken has now just recently retired as the head of the photojournalism sequence, and he's also the author of the #1 selling photojournalism text in the world, Photojournalism: The Professional's Approach. And he had just finished writing a new chapter for his book on ethics. And so it was really good timing. Unfortunately, Ken's in Italy at the moment, so he's not going to be able to speak to us. But what I can tell you is that for Ken, in our discussion, the two things that stuck out for me were this. Due to the fact that we now have 7 billion plus photographers out there, or potential photographers out there in the world, and they all know what they can do with themselves, with their cameras, with regard to posing, with regard to staging photographs, it's a heck of a problem, because the default setting for journalists is that the public doesn't really believe your stories. I mean, it helps through the credibility of your publication, but for the most part, there's always that little seed of wonder about a photograph and whether or not it was the result of posing or staging or some other contrived situation while it was being shot. And then on the other end of the spectrum, once you get it back into the computer, was it photoshopped? Were things moved around? So it's a heck of a problem. And it's, you know, for those of us who plan on making our livings with photography, it's another one of those things we have to jealously guard all of the ethical considerations that go into what we do when we make our photographs and when we prepare our photographs for publication. So that being said, this panel is brought together two of the country's top picture editors and thinkers about journalistic ethics. Sue Morrow has been, first of all, let me just tell you, we're going to bring our second speaker in via Skype from the University of Missouri, Rick Shaw. He'll be joining us in about 40 minutes, or 30 to 40 minutes, depending on how it goes. And Rick is the director of the Pictures of the Year International Competition at the University of Missouri, the most prestigious photojournalism competition in the world. So Rick will be joining us soon, but first I'd like to introduce Sue Morrow from the Sacramento Bee, you're actually on leave right now, though, aren't you? Mm-hmm. Are you on leave right now?
I will be soon.
She's going to be on leave. As soon as she gets out of here, she's going on leave. That's the kind of day we're going to have here. Sue Morrow has been an advocate for visual journalism as a picture editor, a designer, an art director, and a newsroom manager. She believes that everyone has a story to tell and that multimedia is a powerful medium to report these stories. She's worked as a photo editor and manager at some of the best papers in the country, including the San Jose Mercury News, the Tampa Bay Times, the Sacramento Bee, the Atlanta Journal-Constitution, and the Boston Globe. During her tenure as assistant manager at the Times, the photo staff was recognized with numerous awards for photography and editing in the Pictures of the Year International, Best of Photojournalism, and the Society of News Design, winning the Picture Editing Team Portfolio in Pictures of the Year International. So with that, I'm going to give you Sue Morrow.
Thank you, Kim. Thank you. Welcome. Can everybody hear me? Okay, great. I'm happy for a microphone because my voice does not travel well. Okay, so how many here are photographers? Excellent. And the rest of the room, journalists for the written word, audio, radio, television? Okay, great. That helps me because I think really all of this applies to everybody sitting in this room. I think it's, to follow up what Kim said, it's critical that we all know how to be accountable for our work. I don't care where you're going to end up, whether you're going to be an independent journalist or in a newsroom or a publication that's very different than journalism. We all have to be accountable for what we do. So that's what we're going to talk about today. So why ethics? And I tell you, this room and many others like you, you are the future of journalism. And you are going to be responsible, no pressure, for how the world sees your stories, and how we interpret them is critical. And many things you will encounter during your decision making are ethical decisions, and maybe you've already encountered some of them, but ethical issues tend to be uncomfortable. They tend to be of visuals that are hard to look at. We're not going to look at hard to look at things today, but I'm sure you've already seen them. I mean, we see that pictures are ubiquitous. Images are ubiquitous to us now, and they're right there in front of us. And no longer, speaking from a point of view of a newspaper newsroom, our online standards are different than print still. So that's something that we have to keep in mind. But these kind of things can be iconic images. You can think of many of them, I'm sure you can. They happen every day, but they're our code. It's our code, it's what we do. So I'm gonna go through some guiding principles, and I'm gonna give this PDF to Kim. You guys can get it from him later if you wish. I'm happy to share that out with you. But how do we visually convey truth and accuracy? How do we interpret a private moment? How do we measure what's beautiful enough without going into Photoshop and changing things? It's the aesthetic value that we find critical and important for a great picture. So how do we have so many tools to make things better. How do we measure that? How do we decide to publish everything when it can be seen online? And how do we remain sensitive instead of sensational? And who are the stakeholders in our work? Is it us? Is it the people in your pictures or in your stories? And when do we have the right, and how do we honor being part of those private moments that people allow us to take part in? And defending those choices when we actually do come into that personal space that people trust you with. And how do we prepare to make those decisions? So this is kind of a checklist of things that I think after you do this a while, you just kind of do this automatically, and you can anticipate the conversations that you have to have. So I think that as journalists, whether you're in the field, and then as Kim said, to come back into the newsroom or your publication and figure out what to do with your content then, this is what we're going to talk about. Define your journalistic purpose, no matter what you do, whether it's just an individual story, a personal project. What is your aim? What do you intend to do with that? What are your organizational guidelines? What do they stand for? What are their ethics? Do they have an ethics policy? Read it, learn it, understand it, question it. What are your ethical concerns about a particular picture? If you have a gut feeling something might be bugging you about it, you should listen to that. I mentioned stakeholders a minute ago. Who are those affected by what we decide to do with these pictures? Think about inclusivity. Think about you should not be the only one making these decisions. Reach out for opinions other than your own. When you talk about the product, is the content authentic? And that may mean different things to different stories. You know, if it's a portrait series, is it really authentic? Is it a documentary story? Was it approached in that fashion? And are you pitching it that way? Is it fair? Is it honest? I welcome questions, by the way, okay? Is it an example of your credible creativity? What do you know? What do you need to know about a story? These are also questions about process. Is it the photographic content? Is it what you saw in the viewfinder? Who has a camera here? Can be a phone. I want you to get it out. Whoops. I want you to take a picture of me on the count of 3. You ready? 1, 2, 3. Whose truth? Who has the truth? Who speaks the truth? Which picture is the right one? Okay? That's called point of view, point of perspective. Okay? Okay, delete those. Kidding. Depending on where you are in a room, and you can argue that this person over here had the right picture. Maybe you had the right picture. It's all point of view. But was that authentic? I asked you to do it. That was a set-up picture. Okay? So all these things weigh in mind. The process, you have to justify your thinking on what you want to do with your content. And how can you include voices of diversity and different perspectives? We all bring biases to anything we do. I'm an animal lover. I'm not an animal crazy person. I'm an animal lover. It doesn't mean I share the points of view of a lot of different organizations. I have my own points of view. I bring my biases to that. So we each bring a bias to anything we do. Presentation, what are my alternatives? These days we weigh online. Man, it gets posted. We can change it later. What happens in print? Can't do much in my newsprint anymore because our deadlines are so early. I've had to let go of things that I would usually tediously suffer over. So what are your alternatives? You have a lot more these days. Is the content being changed beyond basic quality corrections? We're talking about Photoshop, we're talking about filters and Instagram. If you're going to bill yourself as a documentary photographer and your Instagram feed is full of pictures of really beautiful pictures, but they're clearly overworked using a lot of funky filters, I don't know if I'm going to buy that as an editor if you're going to try to sell yourself as a documentary photographer. It's just something to think about. And is it necessary to place images within context with additional information via text, via graphics, via interactive information? So I'm going to show you some things, a little bit more visual. Here we go. This is a story about Ben Underwood. Maybe some of you have heard of him. Ben was a wonderful young man in Sacramento. He died a few years ago, but he had called echolocation or echolocation. He's blind. But he was amazing because he could do anything. He could hear by clicks. He could walk through a room and navigate because he could tell where he was by clicking sounds, and they would bounce off. NPR did a story. I don't think they did a story about him, but they did a story about that phenomenon. The kid was a rollerblader. That's his mom on the left. He tap danced. He was a joyful person. Top right, he's with his brother. They carried on a lot. He also had some brain tumors, and he kind of went downhill. All these pictures so far are from Kevin German of now Luceo Images. They're fitting him for prosthetic glass eyes. His facial structure was changing, so he's got molds in his eye sockets. People had trouble with this picture. It was disturbing. I find it quite beautiful. Why? Because I know Ben's story. Perfect example of caption writing that will tell the person what's going on here. He's not suffering, but it's evocative of not just because it's black and white, which is another choice, but his body language and the mood. It's a beautiful photograph, but people were like, oh my God. And I had to talk this thing onto 6 columns of a front, on a features front. People were uncomfortable because it made them uncomfortable. But as soon as they realized what they were looking at, it was less of a problem. So how do we communicate those things? Stevie Wonder entered the scene. They became friends. And he came over and he sang Happy Birthday, you know, the Stevie Wonder Happy Birthday song. We could not record it. We were there to make still pictures. So Ben kind of took a turn, and Jose Villegas covered the funeral because Kevin had gone on to be an independent photographer in Vietnam. Stevie Wonder came to the funeral. So here's a set of pictures. It's his brother, dressed alike. So this was 5 or 6 years ago. Here's all the 4 pictures I just showed you. Which one would you run? Anybody? Which one is the best picture up there? And tell me why. Anybody?
Top right. Top right.
Top right? Why?
Oh, this works. It's just an amazing moment. Him and his brother. I mean, he's connecting with them for the last. Yeah.
Speak up for the room.
Oh, okay. Yeah. He's. I mean, it's an incredible moment. He's connecting with his brother for the last time.
They're dressed alike. Okay. Anybody else? We're in a room full of visual journalists, so we're likely to go right there. Okay. Anybody else? Don't be shy.
I think it's good because it shows Ben, and it compared to the one with Stevie Wonder, I think Stevie Wonder would kind of dominate the picture.
Mm-hmm. So we're all looking at this top right one? Okay, we didn't run that. As much as we knew this young man, our editor did not want to show a casket, a body in a casket. This story, we ran like 3 really good-sized pieces on Ben. And I felt that we knew him well enough and people were up to speed on his health and outlook that they anticipated this. But we ran that one on the front page. That was disappointing to me. And I think his family was disappointed. But that's an example of what we have in conversation now. Talked to my boss yesterday. What would we do now? He thinks we would run the top right picture. 5 and 6 years ago is a long time ago. This would have definitely run online. We didn't even run it online then. So things change. We have got to be willing to change, and we've got to be able to be articulate about why. Okay? All right, when to say enough to Photoshop. Is anybody in this room familiar with this picture? No? Okay, I'll start from the beginning. This picture was made by a former photographer at the Bee. I'm going to name him Brian Patrick. Brian had a stellar career as a photojournalist until this. 5 years ago going on. You know, there were a lot of layoffs, in all the newsrooms. Our picture editing staff was decimated. I was away at grad school at the time. There was a photographer working the photo desk. And so thus you did not have any editor's eyes on this. And if your peers are working as your editor on a Saturday, they're less likely to be your editor. They will be your peer. And things fall through the cracks. So Brian thought for some reason, okay, let me tell you something a little bit about him. He's a phenomenal photographer. Kim knows Brian. I think, and this is my opinion, we get to a point where we know what perfect can look like, what beautiful light can be, could be, composition, and it bugs you that it's not. And I think that he went overboard and didn't even think about it. We published this picture on a Metro cover. It was one of three. This was the dominant image. Nobody noticed until a reader called and said, I think you guys need to take a look at the Photoshop file. And lo and behold, I can see it now. Can you guys see what the problem is? This shape, this shape. This was there. He added them to the background. We have to be transparent about our work. That's a fireable offense. And that's what happened. And we had to tell our readers, and it was awful. And I feel bad about that. And I cannot give this person any kind of assignment that's about journalism. And he's still a wonderful photographer. So pay attention. It's ridiculous. And furthermore, it causes us to go back and look at other things. This was a contest entry. The brighter one is the one that's fake or manipulated. It's kind of hard to see, but the little flames of fire, it grows. They get bigger. I don't have so much of a problem with this. You're opening up shadows. This is opened up. That's all right. But even that little bit, come on. So Lord only knows what else is there, but there were other examples, but I think these are the two biggest ones. And my boss was like, yeah, talk to them about that. It's important. Questions? So don't do it. Okay, and then this is something that is really, this happened just a few days ago. I asked Randall Benton, he's a wonderful, wonderful photographer. Told him I was coming here. Sat down talking last week. I said, you know, if you were a student, what would you need to hear these days? He goes, oh man, I got something for you. I just shot it this morning. And this is a typical everyday newspaper assignment. This is reality. This is the shit that you don't want to do, but you do it anyway, and you do it in the vein of photojournalism because that's what you need to do. So this was a story. It actually ran in the paper today about breakfast, and this guy was fixing vegan French toast with Rice Krispies. I'm really hungry now, and it's powdered sugar. So this was the picture he made of this particular moment. The guy was just back in the kitchen. Here he is, Mr. Chef, fixing the food. And Randall, and that was the ending of it. Yum. Randall's like, he didn't really like that first, this is the first picture, didn't really care for it. And he asked the guy, hey, you think you're gonna make another order of that? You usually make some of that. He goes, yeah, maybe, but I can do it for you. He goes, no. I don't want you to do it for me. And of course, people are nice in these situations. Oh, no, I can do that. No. No, really, don't. Please don't. No, it's okay. So what are you going to do? You just kind of go, oh, shh. And you just try not to let anything happen, right? So the guy got a break, and lo and behold, Randall turns around and he's doing this again. He's like, oh, God. So out of the kindness of this chef's heart, he decided that that was okay. We're talking about a food picture. Is this okay? Is it okay? Why? Why isn't it not okay? It's staged, exactly. But he shot it anyway because the guy was so nice about it. And look what happened. The powdered sugar fell all over the place. And so Bentoni, he was like, so that's karma. He used the first one. He used the one that was not staged. But it's a simple little story. I think that this is the reality of what we deal with every single day. And he shared that with me. These pictures, obviously, they did not end, but look at the composition. It's really nice, right? It's really beautiful. And I'm like, and had that not happened, would we be using that picture? And we were like, no, because he would have been honest with me. But anyway, I thought that was pretty illustrative of the everyday stuff that is not your hardcore documentary stuff, but it's still important. And that's the stuff you really, really still have to defend. Okay, so finding your ethical compass. Change is the only constant. It's something that you will always, always evaluate. You always have choices. The choice was to go with his original picture, or don't use it at all. But surround people who know stuff that you don't know. It's okay to not know stuff. That's how you get better. Make the picture. If you're in a news environment, make the picture. We will talk about it later. But if you don't feel right, I'm not going to tell you to make the picture. You're the one that's there. It's your gut feeling to do it or not. How should it be published? We mentioned this a little bit earlier. Standards for online, different than print. You got to understand what your publication and what you're willing to do. Copyright law, particularly those of you who will be independent journalists, know what your rights are. Don't give your work away. Nothing happens in a vacuum. Understand the facts. Understand what you're up against. Do not set up pictures and pass them off as documentary, ever, period. Portraiture is a very good solution. Portraiture is beautiful. I love it. And real moments can happen when you do portraits. It's okay. Call it a portrait. Write portrait in your caption. Make it clear. Be transparent. So if you're having a hard time on figuring out what you should publish, or your editor's having a hard time, what would you say to a reader that's going to challenge you the next morning or that next hour? What would you say to them to defend your choices? Those are some of my favorite calls, and I do mean that. I enjoy talking to people about that kind of stuff. Your work is not about you. It's about your subject, and it's about their story. Like I said earlier, understand what your own biases are. Seek out diverse opinions. And lastly, your beliefs become your thoughts become your words become your actions, Your actions become your habits become your values become your destiny. So good luck out there. And my information, you can get it from me later, from Kim. Happy to talk about any of this stuff, okay? Good deal.
Great. Thank you. So we're going to do a little switch on the computer here. We're going to get Rick Shaw online from the University of Missouri. Do you have any questions for Sue while I'm getting Rick organized here? There you go. Why don't you?
Rick?
I'd like to make a comment. For all of us who will be professional photographers, when you see something on the field that is happening, that somebody is making up a picture, staging it, what do? We keep silent, we call their attention.
Great question.
My suggestion is expose that guy to the limit so that it will not be repeated again. Report that to the editors or anybody else that will say, this guy is a bad guy and destroying the integrity of our profession.
Yeah.
So I love the last thing about your thoughts becoming your words.
Can I remind everyone to use the mic because we are live streaming this, and otherwise everything will be silent.
I loved your closing words about how your thoughts can become your words and your words, your actions, etc. What is it that these young aspiring journalists can do to sort of start at the beginning about their words? Like, what would you suggest that they do?
Understand your motives. Should I use that mic? I am mic, okay. Understand your motives. When you go out and make a weather picture, you know, how are you representing yourself? How do you introduce yourself to people? You know, don't be a jerk. You get more bees with honey. One step begets the next, I think. And if you present yourself professionally and open and honestly, you pretty much, and be patient with people. That's where I would start.
Knowing your motives.
Knowing your motives. Thank you. You've got a great voice. Are we ready?
Well, I think we are ready. Let me just introduce our second panelist that you can say hello electronically to him, Sue. There he is. Yes. This microphone. Okay, I'm holding the microphone. Hello, Rick Shaw. Let me turn you up a little bit. Can we get him on the TV? Or we're good? Okay. Rick Shaw, whom you see in pixels here, is the Director of Pictures of the Year International, the oldest and most prestigious photojournalism program in the world. POY's primary mission is to promote the work of photojournalists and foster professional development as a program of the Donald W. Reynolds Journalism Institute in Missouri. Shaw oversees the program's 72-year competition, coordinates worldwide exhibitions, and cultivates the POY archive. He was at the Sacramento Bee too, wasn't he? Did you guys work together? No, you guys missed each other. Rick's prior newspaper career spans 27 years in visual editing and management. He began as a photojournalist and went into picture editing, working for newspapers such as the Florida Times-Union, the Sacramento Bee, and he was named the Director of Photography and Graphics at the Arizona Republic in 2001. Joined the Hartford Courant as the Director of Design and Graphics. So I could go on, but I think I better I don't need to go on. Okay, well, ladies and gentlemen, here's Rick Shaw. So I was going to say, if you have a few things to say about what you've seen so far.
Yes, I turned off live streaming. Surreal world of seeing myself on the screen that I'm also Skyping on. So I'm looking at a beautiful blank wall, and I presume that there's people back there, so that's a good thing. Let's see, I'm not sure where to jump in, really, but I have some some notes to consider. And I'll just jump in on a couple of things and add to perhaps what Sue has mentioned. One of the things that I think is important to understand is that this is no longer a still photography world. And this is becoming quite a brine mixture of fresh water and salt water and all different kinds of water, because we're dealing with motion photojournalism. We're dealing with still photojournalism. We're dealing with people that want to make short doc films under a journalistic umbrella. And we all know that the documentary film world deals in representations of the truth, and perhaps not our same ideals of what truth with a capital T would be. So, for ever, I guess, most photojournalists have subscribed to the code of ethics that MPPA puts out, and we sort of follow that in our program in terms of the competition. But those lines are definitely beginning to blur now, more so with videography, cinematography, storytelling. Where does documentary storytelling and journalism, where are those blurred lines? And those are creating some real discussions, certainly within the Missouri School of Journalism, because this year we had a new program start that's the Documentary Film Center under the Journalism School umbrella. And so that's something to consider. For the most part, with our program, Pictures of the Year International, we have a code of ethics. And we call it Spirit of the Competition. And some of the things that we deal with are mainly how photographs are presented. And the thing that we have to sort of take into account is that across the world, there are different standards on how you post-process an image for your audience that another country might have completely different. So a lot of the basics of understanding ethics for us deals with things like making sure that the digital manipulation doesn't occur. There's two ends of the spectrum. One is digital manipulation, and the other one is digital adjustments for highlighting, bringing down highlights, opening up shadows, that kind of thing. Digital manipulation is where you take the bunny from one photograph and put it on the back of a goat of another. We know that that's wrong. So we understand both ends of the spectrum. But what's unclear is that area in the middle that is how far do we bring up the shadows? How much do we adjust the tone of the image, the color tone of the image, the white balance of the image? Things like that, cropping the image even to a point. We're getting into stitching images together with panoramic cameras and things like that. So those are all concerns for us that really don't have a clear answer, because, like I said, and I'm speaking in very general terms here, but in Latin American countries, their processing of images tends to oversaturate the images to where they have a real almost borderlines on a neon look to it. Whereas in Europe, it's a very desaturated look, a very muted look to it. You have to ask yourself, what is the best representation of that scene? And those are things that we deal with. Just to run through some of our guidelines, photojournalism should reflect the human experience, capture the moment, and report news events and social issues with respect for the integrity of the scene and the intent of the moment. And that's sort of the key thing, respect for the integrity of the scene and intent of the moment. Now that's not something that you can define very easily. Everything is moving and shifting in that regard. The content of a photograph must not be digitally manipulated or altered through post-production processing. We accept two types of photographic mode, color and black and white. Now, we have participants in our program that will argue all day long about color and black and white, and that's a full PhD, thesis dissertation on, whether black and white is truth or not. We just accept that black and white and color are the two canvases that we have to work with. But within that, we do say that color images should, and this is kind of where I land on it, replicate what the human eye experiences. Could that be any more vague? But it gives us a starting point. So our code of ethics basically say color images should replicate what the human eye experiences. And black and white images should be bitonal and display a full grayscale range from highlight to deep shadow blacks. And that's how we define color images. So you can see just by what I'm talking about in many of our ethics guidelines, we're not talking about, completely Photoshop manipulation to create an image that is fiction. It's completely false. It's completely manufactured. What we're talking about are those nuances between a given scene and whether one is post-production is here and the other one's here, and it's not here and here. It's so close, and we have people that are reviewing these images discussing, what was the scene really like? Is this darkroom processing, if you will, done just for the effect to create a mood, or is it really like that? Those are the issues that we sort of get into. So that's sort of part one, us. There is a couple of things that I took notes on that I'll just throw out here, and Kim, be sure and just, unplug me whenever I go too far here or go too long. I think it's important to understand, first of all, that we are in an economic climate to where many journalists and photojournalists are working independently. And so they do not have that series of gatekeepers or editors or people that I consider acting as, and I like to use the term, the first reader. When I was a photo editor and visual editor, I always tried to consider myself that first reader. How do I perceive the image? If a photographer shows me a photograph and I don't get it, then probably there's going to be a lot of other people out there, our readers, who are not going to get it either. And so, an editor wears many different hats. One of them is to be the first reader. One of them is to go down, like Sue said, the code of ethics that's in the back of your mind, all of those things. But then the good thing about a news organization, and whether it's a newspaper, newsroom, an agency, any organization, is that role of editor. And I feel like that's something that we have lost over time. And the example that I'll take down the road on this is, and this is a true story, a tale of two editors on both coasts. So I worked for a newspaper in California. The first initial of the paper began with the word B. And we had an editor that felt like, that believed that the role of a newspaper is important to safeguard those individuals that are most vulnerable in our society. That unless the situation, the news event presents itself, if it's a feature picture or it's something that's fairly routine, he would go above and beyond to make sure that if that individual, the subject of that photograph, was not aware or might be put in a bad light or in some way felt like that it was imposing on their vulnerability, he would question the image. So much so to the fact that for example, if there was a 9-year-old child riding down the street and the child didn't have a safety helmet on, he would question whether we should run the photograph. Even though it was a feature picture, doesn't matter. He said, you know, it's against the law, they're supposed to wear a helmet, we're putting this kid, you know, in a bad light, and it's simply for a feature picture. Okay. That's his interpretation of what his role as the executive editor was. Literally, 9 months later, I go to work for another newspaper, other side of the country, the Hartford Courant, and we had a photograph came up. It was a feature photo, just a random day, nice day out at the park. The parents are pulling stuff out of the car, and they have the detachable child seat out, and it is sitting on the hood of the car while they have their heads in the car pulling stuff out. Now you could look at that, and as a new father, I was like, boy, that's teetering there. You know, that's wow. That should we be? Is that a concern? And I know it would have been a concern for my editor at the Bee. This editor and many others, their feeling is that our role is not to be the moral police, but to really represent our society, our community as it is, without regard to being, to safeguarding anything. We show it as it is. So I just wanted to point that out as an example of what it comes down to is if you're in an environment where you have gatekeeper roles to where editors serve as the first eyes on a story, on a photograph, on a video, or whatever, that in and of itself is a spectrum. And it really comes down to whomever is the key editor and has the final decision that sets those standards for ethics and within the newsroom. So that's part one. You know, I think that the other important thing to understand when it comes to ethics in visual journalism, covering both still photography and motion video, is what we bring to it in terms of our own cultural norms and our perceptions of the other, cultural differences that come into play. I see this every year during our competition. During our photojournalism competition, we get, you know, close to 58,000 images that come through, and they are judged by a panel of esteemed visual journalists. Sue and Kim have both served on those panels, and thank you very much for doing so. But what I try and do is put together a panel that is diverse in terms of the role that they play within the newsroom, whether they're an editor or a photographer, what part of the country they're from, gender, ethnicity, all of those issues come into play. Because every year there's always an example where one judge will point out something that makes a huge difference. And one that I can remember is we came across, it was a feature photo. Many of these that we're talking about are not, you know, war situations or conflict situations or heavy news. Oftentimes they come out because it's simply a feature photo. But there was one photograph from India of a young couple that had just gotten married, and they are on this homemade sort of stage, and the background is this decoration of color with flowers. The image is stunning, absolutely stunning. And the two judges that were based in the United States were blown away by the image. Just thought it was wonderful. It was just so great. The couple was so great. And really it was one judge who was based in Pakistan that said, you know, this happens every day. This scene happens on a regular basis. This is part of their wedding culture is to build these stages with the flowers. And I'm looking at this and I don't see anything at all good about this picture. As a matter of fact, anyone with a cell phone walking down the street can shoot this picture 5, 6, 7 times a day, every day. And so you begin to have to try and understand that when you're editing photographs and you're looking at photographs, you really need to take in the cultural aspects of every image that comes into play and question, you know, your own background, what you know. Are you applying stereotypes to a given scene or a situation that may not be relevant at all or may be totally unfair? And so I think that this era that we're in is very challenging when it comes to issues of ethics, especially dealing with visual communication, because right now we live in a world where everything is visual, and you know, everything that you look at online, on the web, on your phone is a visual situation, and most of that is unfiltered. There is no gatekeeper at all. And so, you know, we need to be especially vigilant right now to put a critical eye to some of the images that are coming across. And for us in the photojournalism industry, whether it's a still photograph or a motion photograph, you know, we are very self-policing in this world, because I get a lot of questions. Well, how do you know that all these 58,000 images are not photoshopped or not manipulated? The bottom line with all journalists is that the core, the foundation, everything that we do is based on credibility. Credibility is paramount for us to do our job. And once that credibility is not, it doesn't need to be shattered, it just needs a slight crack. Once your individual credibility is cracked, you've lost everything that you've worked so hard to achieve. And that's why ethics in visual journalism is so important, because once there is a perception, it doesn't even need to be real. Once there is a perception that your credibility is lost, then for all intent and purposes, you've lost. All right. Have I said anything that's at all relevant to, this is biology 101.
Wrong classroom.
Oh, okay.
Well, thank you, Rick. And
I'll stop there. I don't know. What do you think, Kim? Did any of that make sense?
did that make sense? So we have time. We have about 15 minutes here. We'd like to talk, maybe, do you have any questions for Rick? Do you have anything you'd like to bring up or agree with or disagree with? Yeah. You two are going to be in the hot seat now.
Okay.
So. Okay.
Howdy. I think that it was really great. It seems like we should have talked before this, but we didn't have to. I loved his follow-up to my nuts and bolts, because Rick is, I mean, you're exposed to so much because of your position at Missouri, and I'm in one newsroom, and so your position is global and mine is so local. And yet I'm hearing that the credibility factor, all those things are still incredibly important. So whatever you said, yeah, listen to this guy. It's good stuff.
Because you have a lav mic there.
Oh, yeah.
So let's put you
I do.
on the house mic. Okay.
Okay.
Oi, getting the microphone situation. Okay, do we have any questions? In the back. There you go. This will be.
Got it. It's okay.
Hi, Mr. Shaw.
Loud as you can.
Hi, Mr. Shaw. My question is more about nature photos, since we can't really find out if like a nature photo is actually fake sometimes because the animal can't really talk itself. My real question was about this wolf picture from 2 years back, about how this photo was actually fake because it was staged. But as you as a panelist, as you as a juror, if you ever get nature photos, how do you find out if it's fake or not when the animal can't really tell for itself?
Did you happen to hear that, Rick? We're having.
I did not. If you could
Okay.
repeat that.
Yeah.
Was
If it's
it
for
a-
me,
Is it a wolf picture?
It may be more useful for you to actually
Yeah, come on
here
up.
and ask your questions.
Come on
That's
up.
I don't know quite how this works.
so is this for me or for Sue or for both of us or?
Was there a wolf picture in
For you,
POI? Is
Rick.
that what you're talking about?
Here you go. It's on a short leash.
Hi, Mr. Shaw.
Yes.
My question was about nature photos.
Yes.
You as a jurist and you as a panelist, how are you able to tell in nature photos if they're real or not when the animal cannot speak for itself? Just like the wolf photo from 2 years ago that went into competition, and the picture was of the wolf jumping over a wooden fence, and the jurors actually found out that photo was fake. My question is, how do you find out nature photos are fake?
Nature photos are fake. Well, that's a really good question. One of the things, and I'm just kind of jumping off here, one of the things that did change, we do have, what it's referring to is we have a category called science and natural history. And up until about 2 or 3 years ago, that category was anything goes. So you can submit photographs of something found in nature, or you can submit a studio environment portrait of a critter. Didn't matter. Well, it got to the point to where we really couldn't discern what was a portrait or a stage situation of an animal or a stuffed animal or whatever, and what wasn't. And so I think it was 2 or 3 years ago that we specifically wrote into the science and natural history category that studio setup photographs of anything related to science and natural history were not appropriate in this category. We wanted them to be true life situations found in nature or in the environment or in the society. You know, it would be naive of me to say that every image that was submitted in something did not have some influence by the photographer. I mean, the photographer being there is, you know, influence in a scene in and of itself. But the only thing that we can do in terms of, and we've gone through a lot of steps to try and ensure our own credibility as a program, a couple of things that we've done. Number one, we specifically wrote out this spirit of the competition, which is supposed to be our guidelines. And we actually asked all participants to do an electronic signature of that. The other thing that we do is once all the images are judged and finished judging, we have a 3-day gap now at the end of the competition before the results are official. That gives us a chance to review and vet all of the winning images to make sure that they are valid, that they meet the criteria. And then the other thing that I continually preach is exactly what I mentioned before, that you know, you have to ask yourself, if you're a photojournalist with Getty or the Associated Press or Reuters or the Sacramento Bee or the Dallas Morning News, are you willing to put your entire professional credibility on the line for one photograph in one competition? My, I suppose, naive belief in that is that the answer to that is no, and that since credibility is everything that we have, that in and of itself is the safeguard. Oops. It's a long way around an answer, but
Thank you for your answer.
Well, that's probably a pretty good question in general, because many of us in the audience are reporters, and we were talking about the idea of video. I mean, still photography is really the only one of the media that is truly in the moment, right? It's a crescendo thing. It's you're building up to one split second that tells the story best, and all of those decisions and all those ethical, all the things you have to weigh ethically come into it pretty much as the picture's coming together. And the field work, I mean, it's interesting because you guys have reviewed a lot of film in your days, a lot of pictures, and quite often you can see how the photographer's thinking and how they're working their way into the, where they think this picture is. So I guess that might be my question. Do you think photographers, do you think they'll sometimes, you mentioned that earlier, you can always take the picture and decide not to use it later. Do you see a lot of photographers kind of getting right to that point and then veering away, or Sue? Yeah.
Not the ones I've worked with. And it depends on the situation too. Most, the folks I work with are, oh my God, they're veterans. There's only a few that have been in the business for 5 years, and we're coaching them, but they've covered some really nasty wildfires in the last couple of years. Andrew Singh is our youngest employee at the Bee now, and he's been in some real stuff, and he's been courageous and thoughtful and asks a lot of questions. And so when Mark Morris, our boss, and when we go through his stuff, it's so important to have an editor look at your work, because it's truly what Kim said. You begin to understand how people think and how they move and how they approach individuals. If the pictures are not intimate enough, or if they're not close enough, you begin to understand why. And that way you can help them be better photographers, if you can kind of see how they approach something. And then you can have conversations. I'm like, okay, so what are you gonna do next time? Or just talk to them about what they might be uncomfortable with. But our staff is, they don't veer away. They've been doing it for a long time, so they don't really veer away from those moments. But I find that, oh my gosh, do I have a minute?
Yeah.
When I was at the Boston Globe, have you guys heard of Stan Grossfeld? Amazing photographer at the Boston Globe. He shipped me a bunch of black and white film. This was '93, so we were not yet digital. He shipped me a bunch of black and white film from Vietnam, and he had a lab person at the Bee develop it. He said, Sue, can you look at this over the weekend? I'm like, sure. And Stan is, Stan? He's kind of crazy, cool, all over the map kind of person. He's just kind of rumpled. His clothes have never met an iron. He's just like, that kind of, he's just a character. And so I was looking through his film, and time after time after time, had a loop, and I was like, God, out of focus, out of focus, out of focus, and oh my God, here it's coming, here it's coming. I'm like, damn, clipped it. We used to clip film where, where was the good one? You clipped it with a little puncher. And time after time, that's how he worked. And all of a sudden, you could tell he was moving into place and things were moving into place. And the moment came together, sharp, beautiful. And it was uncanny. And it was like magic. And that's why I'm an editor, because I think that's really cool. I'm a geek.
Anybody else have a question? We'd like to have you come up if you would. Quick questions?
No.
I can, Kim, do I have a minute?
Yeah.
I want to forewarn the world. This is a forewarning. Mark this down today, that this issue of visual ethics and what is visual truth is only going to explode.
Yeah.
As we see our society becoming more fractured politically and more divisive, you can already get a feeling that when an image comes across that is moved, that does not align with the political landscape of the other side, that other side, will begin to question the ethics of that image. We saw a little bit of that with the child on the Syrian beach photo. I remember that. When that first came out, there were some rumblings about, the first question was, is this real? That question wasn't asked in Oklahoma City during the bombing. That question wasn't asked, with Nick Gutt's photo of the napalm girl. But it's only going to grow from there. And I'm not talking about just Democrat versus Republican. It's a world that is becoming at ends of the spectrum, and there is no middle. The middle is becoming, the minority in this case, and it's the drumbeat, the echo chamber from either side. And a well-meaning visual journalist can produce something, record something, capture a moment. And this is a forewarning. I think this issue of ethics, reliability, truth in visual journalism and representation is only going to become more heated and will become, a hurricane of debate.
Questions?
I could follow up.
Yes.
Something like that. Personal experience, and it's going on now. I'm working on a documentary on my own. It's about a horse rescue in Athens, Ohio. And Rick, someone in Kentucky blogged about a little minute promo piece that ran that I cut a couple of years ago, and somehow it got posted on their website. So this blogger in Kentucky didn't like it. And everything that Rick was just talking about is coming out, and it's I've been dealing with a lot of haters. They're questioning how the audio was cut. Oh, well, and these are in the comments. Oh, well, it was cut because she didn't want so-and-so to say this. Oh, yeah, and then they cut it because she wanted us to see that and not their point of view. And it was simply a trailer, 30 to 45 seconds. And I've spent a lot of time and energy evaluating what that trailer looks like and how it represents my work. I think it's representative of my work, but I'm taking a second look at it to make sure it's balanced and true to the story. So it's true what Rick is saying, and you guys are on social media. You know how this stuff explodes. And I think that this thing that this blogger wrote is going to die down a little bit, but it's really made me stop and think about how my own work is perceived. Rick Rockamora, I'm so sorry, I apologize. Rick Rockamora's talk soon on advocacy storytelling is going to be really interesting, and I think it applies to a lot of what we're doing as independent journalists now too. So,
Well, I think on that note, a perfect segue, I think we're going to thank Rick Shaw in Columbia, Missouri, Pictures of the International, and Sue Morrow of the Sacramento Bee. Thank you very much. Thanks for coming, and we're going to reset here and have our panel with our advocacy journalists in a couple of minutes. Actually, it's 1 o'clock. Thank you, Rick.
You are most welcome. I hope I passed the.
You were great. You were.